Tim makes many efforts to endear himself to Charlotte, as Tim, Charlotte, and their guest sunbathe together one day. Tim sees a chance and offers to apply sunscreen to Charlotte's back, but he breaks the bottle and gets sunscreen all over her. Because of his shame, he resolves to go back in time and do the chores in a less serious and careful way. Tim spends the whole summer working to gain Charlotte's favor, but his attempts are futile until it is too late. The day has finally come for Charlotte to leave the mansion. Tim intends to tell her how he feels about her the night before she leaves, but he is quickly stopped when he hears that Kit Kat has already informed Charlotte that he may do so. Tim is irritated by this finding. Charlotte considers how their evening together may have gone differently if he had approached her first the night before at their house. He understands that the thought has inspired him. Tim flies back in time over the summer to tell Charlotte the truth about what occurred. Charlotte, on the other hand, tells him to re-ask her on the night he would spend her last night at their house. This proves without a shadow of a doubt that he never had a shot with Charlotte. No matter what, Tim ultimately gives up looking for her and accepts failure. After Charlotte left, Tim packed his possessions and moved out of their house the following day. He currently lives in London with James' friend Harry. Tim is excited about the new chapter of his life. Tim's job as a lawyer puts him in touch with mostly other males. Therefore, he hasn't been able to get a date in the first 6 months of the year. His fortune starts to turn around the night Jay takes him to Dans Le Noir, a restaurant where patrons eat in complete darkness. At this time, they are sitting next to a woman named Mary and her friend Jonah. Tim and Jay make their long-awaited face-to-face introduction to the girls after dinner. When Tim first sees Mary, he is whisked away, and it is clear that sparks have flown between them from the moment their eyes first met. Before they part ways, she gives him her contact information. Tim skips back home, but when he gets there, Harry greets him with an enraged growl. Because the main character had forgotten his lines, the opening of his play was chaotic. Tim is able to go through time and meet Harry right before the first night of the theater. He operates in this way because he wants to make things better. He had a talk with Tom, who is playing the main character, in order to get him to practice his lines. The scheme works, but one of the participants forgets their lines. Tim is able to help his pal by going farther back in time. Finally, things worked out well for the play. When Tim checks his phone, he notices that Mary's phone number has been deleted from the contact list. He couldn't remember the great evening he had spent with Mary after flying back in time. Tim is having a bad day, so he chooses to spend the next morning eating breakfast with Harry, who is in a good mood. Tim steals Harry's newspaper and begins reading it when he finds an advertisement for a Kate Moss concert somewhere in the city. He plans to spend a week at the event in anticipation of meeting Kate Moss, since he knows Mary is a fan of her. 1 week later, Mary arrives at the workplace for the first time, and Tim approaches her with trepidation. However, when they eventually meet, things do not go as planned, and he discovers that Mary is now dating a guy called Rupert. Tim discovers that Rupert and Mary originally met at an event held by Jonah. After learning what would happen at the party, he flies back in time to change the course of events. Tim arrives at Jonah's home and tries to get Mary to leave the party with him before Rupert arrives. Mary is at a loss for what to do, but she gets a strong feeling that she is being drawn to him. They run into Rupert as they are leaving, who was unaware that he was passing the woman he had in mind to be his future partner and who they bumped into as they were leaving. While that is going on, they have a lovely lunch and get to know each other better. Tim ultimately accompanies Mary home, and when they arrive, Mary extends an invitation to Tim to visit her apartment. They take their date into their bedroom as things begin to heat up. Tim's first sexual encounter with Mary is tough because of a series of humiliating incidents, such as tripping over Mary's shoes and having difficulty removing her bra. He decides to travel back in time, but this time he doesn't bother taking Mary's shoes off, instead removing her garments as quickly as possible. Everything goes smoothly this time, but Tim is well aware that he has room for growth. Tim tries a few times until the couple has the perfect first night of love together. Their connection becomes stronger over the next several months, and as a consequence, they decide to move in together at some point. Tim spots Charlotte in the theater, where she is with a buddy named Rory. The talk begins well, but quickly takes an unexpected turn. He gives it one more try, but it does not work out for him. He ultimately gives up after 3 tries and decides not to talk to her. Instead, Charlotte is the one who notices him and strikes up a discussion with him. Charlotte apologizes to him for having previously rejected him and asks him to dinner. Charlotte requests that he follow her to her apartment and then attempts to get him to join her inside. Tim had a revelation about how much he felt for Mary when he was finally ready to abandon his first love. He then goes back to his home and wakes her up to ask her to marry him. He decided to attempt it again after understanding it wouldn't be as romantic as he had planned. She responds the same way the second time. Tim presented Mary to his mother and father for the first time over the summer. Tim and his father had a great time together, while Mary and her mother got along well. Kit Kat, who had a bad experience in London, is surprised to find himself back in the United States. The news that Tim and Mary are intending to marry and that Mary is expecting a child has filled the Lake family with joy. Even though it rained throughout the ceremony and the reception, they still had a lovely and memorable wedding. The wind tears the tent apart and finally blows it away, causing everyone to seek protection inside the house. Tim goes through time to change his best man selection in the event that Rory, Harry, or Jay botch their speeches. Finally, he selects his own father. Posey, their daughter, was born a few months after they married. Tim is enthralled by every element of fatherhood, from the best to the worst and everything in between. They will soon be moving into a new house, and Posey will be 1 year old not long after. Kit Kat comes after Harry, Rory, and the rest of the guests, but she is running late. Kit Kat's unpleasant boyfriend, Jimmy, is waiting there when Tim opens the door after hearing the doorbell. They had an argument earlier in the day, so Kit Kat had to drive herself for the remainder of the day. Kit Kat was unable to handle her automobile when driving to Tim's house, and she had consumed alcohol earlier in the day. Tim returns back in time in an effort to save her, but instead abducts her. This, however, does not improve the problem. Kit Kat acquired a drinking problem as a coping technique as a result of her rocky relationship with Jimmy. Tim attempts to reconnect with his sister by engaging in conversation with her. When that fails, he decides to take Kit Kat back to the New Year's Eve party where they first met Jimmy. Instead of dating Jimmy, she strikes him out of wrath, despite the fact that he has no recollection of her in this scenario. Kit Kat understands she has affections for Jay almost immediately after the brothers are returned to the present. She decides to go out with Jay rather than Jimmy this time, and the date goes considerably better than it did with Jimmy. Tim goes home after saving his sister's life and making her happy, only to find that he had a boy named Tim rather than a daughter named Posey. His heart sinks to his gut as he suddenly realizes everything. He instantly enters a closet and travels back in time to the moment James was born in order to converse with him. James thinks that if he changes his conduct in any manner before the birth of his child, he will get a different sort of child. Nothing that happened before Posey's birth can be changed, even if he chooses to keep her. Tim is unwilling to accept that he will no longer have the daughter he nurtured, so he goes back in time to undo the changes he made to Kit Kat's life and enables her to be killed in a car accident. Tim and Mary stay in the hospital with Kit Kat as she undergoes medical care. Kit Kat makes the intentional choice to make good adjustments in her life as a consequence of their aid. Tim suggests to Kit Kat that she start dating Jay because he imagines another future in which she is happy with him. She is dating Jay in this timeline. Tim is happy to be reunited with his daughter when he finally gets home from the hospital. He wants to extend his family and have more children since they provide him so much pleasure. Despite Mary's initial objections, they eventually had a child together after 2 years. Tim helps Mary prepare for a visit from a best-selling author who will be visiting her workplace one evening. They mistakenly leave Posey downstairs, where she trashes a piece of paper stolen from Mary's office. Tim's mother calls him in the middle of the night to tell him that James has cancer, which will kill him eventually, but Tim wants to use time travel to treat him instead. Mary and Tim take Kit Kat to their beach house, where Tim speaks with his father as Kit Kat sits at his side. They are unable to use time travel to cure his cancer since doing so will endanger Tim and Kit Kat's lives. They may attempt to fix all that life throws at them, but going back in time will not assist them. James shares with Tim a skill lesson that he believes is significantly more important. The first step is to attempt to keep as normal a schedule as possible, despite all of the stresses and problems of everyday life. Second, after experiencing a day for the first time, he should go back and revisit portions of his life, while focusing on the great things that the world has to offer. Tim keeps his vows and finds delight in both the simple and exceptional events that occur in his life. However, there are other days, such as the day his father died, that he never wants to relive. Tim goes back in time to visit his father when he is younger and in better health because he does not want to say goodbye to him. Tim is soothed by James's death by the idea that he may still visit the past and spend time with his father whenever he misses James. Mary decides one day that she wants to have a third child. Tim is afraid to have a third child since he is fully aware that if he does, he will never see his father again. After much deliberation, he comes to the conclusion that he should let go of the past and focus on the future. After that, Mary's pregnancy has developed to the point where she will soon give birth after a few months. This is Tim's final chance to go back in time and meet his biological father. He's resolved to play one last round of table tennis with his father before the clock runs out. When James observes Tim's sad expression, he realizes that this is most certainly their final time together. His son's choice is one that he supports. They go back in time to when Tim was a child as a special present for one another. James and Tim's time running and playing on the beach had come to an end. They both remark that their health has improved and that they have more energy. Tim tearfully bids his father goodnight for the final time before returning to the present to witness the birth of his third child. Tim's life carries on as usual throughout the years. He is there for his family at both happy and sad times. With Mary, he has completed his family, and Kit Kat and Jay are now expecting their first child together. On one occasion, he lets Mary sleep in while he cooks breakfast for his children and enjoys their company. Tim decides that he will never travel back in time again. After that, he would live each day as if it were the second time he had ever experienced it. This time, he discusses how to enjoy pleasure in life, from important milestones to ordinary occurrences.